I am one of the oh, there it comes. Hi, everybody. I'm one of the co-founders of GitHub. Does anybody in the room use GitHub? Awesome. And I'd like to talk a little bit today about open source, right? So there are a lot of people in this audience, I think, that know basically what open source is. How many people have maintained an open source project? Okay, so maybe a quarter of the group. So for those of you who haven't or don't really know what the mechanics of open source is, I think it's interesting to look at this. So I'm going to do a short history of open source for you. So I want to put it in a different context. So let's say that you're a lawyer and you have a document that you've worked on, and you decide that you'd rather share this document with people and get them to help you make it better than you would just having everybody reinvent the wheel all of the time. So you want to share it, right? So you say you have a preferred stock investment agreement that you've drawn up, and you want to share it with people. So maybe you put it on the internet somewhere, put it on Dropbox, whatever, share that link with people. Other lawyers that are trying to do the same thing, instead of reinventing this particular wheel, say, great, this person is starting to get known in the community for these types of things, so they download it. And they find a problem. It's not spelled sock, right? So they fix it. They fix the document somehow, and then they want to contribute it back to you. So if you've worked with Microsoft Word, I think you can imagine how difficult this process is. Like, how do you get the changes that somebody else has made back to the original person? Say the original person has added a bunch of stuff to this document in the meantime, and you email them, what, like a red line, right, of the changes that you've made, and now it's sort of up to this manual process for the original author to be able to go through and see the changes that you've made and try to incorporate into your original document. So it's a huge pain, right? It's always difficult to collaborate with people. It's more difficult than we would think. It's almost always easier to work by yourself than it is to work with other people on things like this. So the open source community a long time ago, about 25 years ago, came up with a tool set to help them do this. So let's say that you have open source, some program that you're doing. So I'll use a recipe here to demonstrate, and you put it on your website and say, okay, anybody can use my Freedom Cookies recipe. And Bob takes it, copies it, and changes it somehow, says there needs to be more butter and more sugar, and then runs a program called diff. And the diff program gives you this sort of file that says very easily, here's how to change a known state of this document to another state of this document, and they can have a conversation about it. Bob can mail it to the original author. The original author can use a program called Patch, which puts it back together. And that's how open source generally works. Now, there's some issues, and then you have your Freedom Cookies. There are some issues with this progress. The problems with this are in that email section, right? I mean, you can take this and you can come up with sort of the same version of the documents on both sides without having to transfer the entire document over. You can kind of think about this like the way that, to some degree, the way that laws are made, right? You have the patch file is basically the bill, right? So you're not. Every time that you come up with a new law, you're not rewriting the entire US code and saying, here's a better version of the code. You're saying, here's how to change it, right? And so that's how open source works. That's how you collaborate in the open source community. The problems with the contribution model is that it's inconsistent. So there's no standard for this. Everybody comes up with their own way of doing it. Email it in this format. Email it with this mailing, this mailing client. Everybody has a different way of doing it. It's error-prone because of that, right? What does the white space look like? How do you actually transfer it over mail? How do you apply it? What are the rules of the community? And it's complex, right? All of these things make it quite difficult. This is the instructions. This is the contributions file for the Linux kernel. So if you feel like contributing to the Linux kernel, this is the document that you have to read to get your change into the Linux kernel. So this is the problem set of the open source community for the last 25 years. So recently, GitHub has helped change this a little bit. So what we've done is to try to value not just openness, not just saying, here's a thing, I'm going to put it out and other people can use it, and sort of, buyer beware, but collaboration. Actually make it easy as possible, as less friction as possible to get changes back to the author and make it so that the author has the easiest job, right? So that it's not difficult, it's not a pain to actually get contributions and accept contributions from people that are consuming your work. So the basic model is author publishes something. So on GitHub, it looks something like this. where the We the People website, the petitions, the software that runs the petitions website for the White House has published that as open source software, so you can go to whitehouse/petitions and you can download that and you can run your own. And then what happens is what's called a fork. So you take that and you fork it, you hit a button that says fork, and you get your own version of this. So it's public. Instead of just downloading it onto your computer, there's a public version of this that now you own, right? So J.P. McKinney has this particular fork of the petitions website, and he can change it to his heart's content. And they have their own namespace and everything, right? So they can change whatever they want, but they don't have access to sort of the White House petitions project, right? And so when they've made a change and they say, this is a change that I think improves this website, they do what's called a pull request. They say, White House, please, here's something I think makes your software better. Please take it in. And it's a sort of standardized process. And the pull request looks something like this, right? So this is respect word boundaries and profanity detector. And the White House can click on this tab and say, here's the lines that were changed, and have a conversation about those individual lines. It's a standardized, simple process rather than sending a patch file over email to somebody else. And then at the end, the White House can say, no, I don't really like this. It doesn't work for some reason. I'm not going to merge it. And then that cycle can continue. The contributor can try to change it so that the White House does think it's acceptable. And then eventually, hopefully, it gets merged in. And then the next person to download the petitions software gets that change, right? So it's very easy. So the point about this contribution model is that it's simple, right? So it's a little bit easier than running diff and running patch and running these complex command line stuff. It's an open process, so instead of just having the patch file on the contributor's computer and in the email inbox of the author, it's on the web, right? Everybody can see it. Everybody can help the contributor try to make that contribution better before the White House accepts it. And it's, most importantly, probably it's standardized. So there are something like 3 million open source developers on GitHub and 6 million projects of various kinds. If the point of this is that if you learn this model and you know how to contribute to one of these projects, you know how to contribute to 5 million other projects. So for example, the contribution section of this particular project, the White House petitions website, is this line, right? It literally just says, if you want to contribute to this project, fork it and submit a pull request. And it assumes that the community understands what that is. It's not a 8-page document that says, here's how to contribute. So the sort of output of this is that more people contribute to open source projects because it's easy to do so, right? It's more about the contribution and less about the process of contributing. It takes the friction of contributing down to the point where if people actually find value in what you're using and they change it, that it is so easy to give it back to the author that people actually do it. Whereas in the earlier days of open source, that was far rarer because it was so hard to contribute. And what's important about this is that there's also a clear path to implementation. If you were to create a patch file in the old days and mail it to somebody, that is no guarantee that that person's even going to care about that or going to download it. Here, it's fairly clear that if you send a pull request to the White House for this petitions website, they can hit a button and it goes into their source code for the next person to use. There's a clear path to, if I contribute to this project, it will get used or it will at least get considered. There is some path of actually having this implementation go through. So what I want to think about and what I'd like to show you today is how we can take this model of how open source has changed, right, from this sort of concept of just being open to a concept of valuing contributions and apply it to open government, right, to the GitHub way for government. So instead of just openness, I want to focus on how we can make things collaborative. So as an example, what I'd like to show you is a really fascinating project that has sort of recently happened, which is the White House Open Data Policy. Has anybody followed this at all or heard of this? Right. So the White House Open Data Policy is really fascinating. So the White House came out with this memo. This is this nice PDF that says, here's what the White House Open Data Policy is for federal governments and how you should open up your data and whatnot. And there's a couple interesting things. One is that memo points to this website, right? That says, go to this website. Here's how to implement an open data policy for your organization. And there's two interesting things about this. One is that it's a website and not a PDF, which is actually kind of awesome by itself. And the other interesting thing is up at the top, if you can see it, it says, help improve this content, right? So if you visit this website and you see anything in this that you think is not right, if you're an open data policy expert of some sort, if you deeply care about this thing, You can click on help improve this content, and what you get is this. You get an editor, right, in the browser. And you can go in and say, here's something that I think needs to be changed because I think it's fundamentally flawed in some way, or I think it could be better in some way. And you hit save, and it goes into GitHub, and the White House can look at it and say, that's a good point, or I don't think so. But they can go through this flow of actually being able to, you can easily change policy, right? Basically a government policy website. It's a living, collaborative document that is very easy to contribute to. So far, there's been over 50 pull requests, over 50 edits to the website. 30 of them have been closed, so either merged or rejected in some way, but had a conversation about them. And 20 of them are still open, and they're going through them. This was as of a couple days ago. And I want to show you a couple of case studies from this. So for the first one, somebody wanted to add a link. So one of these pull requests is, I want to add a link to this website so that when government people come to this website and say, how do I implement an open data policy for my organization, somebody thought that adding this one URL would be a good idea. So they added 1 or 2 URLs. And then they had basically the world's longest conversation about whether one link should be added to this document. But what's interesting is that at the end, Haley Van Dyke, is Haley here? Haley Van Dyke came in and said, looks like there's an agreement on adding this link, awesome, merging. She hit a button, it merged it into the source code and went live right then, right? So she deployed a new version of the website herself. And that's happened a number of times. There are a lot of pull requests in this where somebody said, here's a new resource, here's a different way of wording this, here's fixing a typo, and Haley or the CIO would go in and hit merge, and it goes live, right? So it's actually a living document that citizens can help contribute to. The second one is more interesting to me, which is redefining an open license. So there was a question about the definition of an open license. Josh Tauber, is Josh here? He decided that this policy misses the mark with open licenses, that there was sort of an issue with how the White House defined an open license in this document. There's this big email thread on Open House Project about how it missed, why it missed, had a conversation with everybody about it. You know, somebody's wrong on the internet, so Josh went and wrote this really big blog post about why the White House is wrong and how this needs to be changed. So you can see like this, this long blog post about the problems with the open data policy. But what's interesting about this is that normally that's where that would have ended, right? More or less. Like you can try to get people at the White House that are doing this to change the policy document, but maybe what if it was a PDF or what if it was something else? How do you actually get that? So now Josh can actually go in and change the document and send a pull request and say, here's a fundamental change to the meaning of the policy, and I think that this is better. And a conversation can be had on that policy. And then at the end, Haley comes in, and this has not been merged as of a couple days ago, but at the end, lawyers at the White House are looking at this particular change and saying, maybe this makes sense or not. And if they say yes, then she can merge it, and if they say no, then they can continue having this conversation. But I feel like this is subtle but important fundamental change to how citizens can contribute to what our government does, right? So a lot of people are interested in this. It changes, this is sort of what is interesting to me. It changes from just the government publishing stuff, just the government being open about things, to providing a clear path to implementation for citizens to contribute meaningfully. So hopefully what I'm thinking, or in this particular model, what we have is the government publishing stuff, citizen specialists, people that are particularly specialized in this particular policy, modifying that, suggesting the change, and then that government being able to review that and say, nope or yep, and having a clear path to implementing those changes, right? So right now you can see this in places like data, Chicago publishing bike maps and people being able to modify those and improve those. You can see it in policy like this White House open data policy. But there are other things we could be doing with this, right? Law, like what if there was, what if bills were basically pull requests, and you could, when it passes, you merge it into the US code. It actually says here's how to change it. Or at the state level, or budgets, right? People could go in and say, here's a better way to improve this budget for your city or for your county or city planning or whatever. Like, whatever the government publishes, what will be interesting to me and what I think we'll see in the future is having this clear path to collaboration so that citizens know that if they take the time to specialize and drill down and contribute and try to improve something, that there is a way for it to actually clearly get implemented. So this is open government to me. This is open government, right? Publishing things and saying, here's data and here's information and here's sort of what we're doing. And this is collaborative government. This is saying, help us improve these things. Simple contribution model, clear path to implementation. So Andrew, when I was here 8 years ago at the 2005 PDF, Andrew opened with this quote that is one of my favorite quotes about technology and government, which is about changing politics from being a dirty word that people cringe at to meaning what it meant in the original Greek, the engagement of all citizens in the decisions that affect their lives, right? Actual engagement, actual collaboration, actually saying, help us improve this rather than here's what's happening. I think that involving people in their government in this visceral way is the future of your civic contract. So thank you very much.